4. Must-have skills for a defensive midfielder. 1. The position where a defensive midfielder receives the ball. What a defensive midfielder or central midfielder must know is that, as you can see here, it is advantageous to receive the ball behind the opponent's pressing line. It may not seem like a big thing, but by understanding and applying this simple fact, you can escape the opponent's pressure, turn your body, and make better plays. On the other hand, as you can see here, if your receiving position is in front of the opponent's attackers, then everything you do is exposed as it is, so it becomes easy to collapse under pressure. But while watching this video, many of you may be thinking that our team's center backs cannot play that pass through the middle, like in this video. That is why, in amateur football, the stronger the team is, the more solid the defense tends to be. Because these kinds of passes often do not come through, in some teams there are cases where the defensive midfielder has to drop deeper into the defensive area to receive. I understand that, but no matter what, receiving the ball behind the line and between the opponent's attackers is still absolutely the right thing to do. Please be sure to remember this, because even if I, as the defensive midfielder, drop into a deeper area, in the case of a center back who is not good at build-up, there is a high chance that instead of moving or spreading to receive the ball again, he will just stand next to me. When you have two center backs and a back four, there are cases where the defensive midfielder drops down and forms a back three to build up, and that is when the opponent has two attackers pressing. If the opponent sends two attackers, then it becomes 2 versus 2 against the center backs. Then you do not have numerical superiority. So if one defensive midfielder drops in a La Volpiana shape, it becomes a 3 versus 2 situation. Then it becomes easier for us to build up. But if the opponent has only one attacker, then there is no need for the defensive midfielder to drop down. If it is two center backs against one attacker, then the defensive midfielder should receive the ball in front of that, behind the opponent's attacker, and carry it forward. 2. Thinking in advance before receiving the ball. To play football well, your thinking speed must be fast, and you must plan your play in advance before receiving the ball. That is true for everyone. And if you are a defensive midfielder, it is even more true, because situations in football change moment by moment. You may have to adjust the first option of the play you had in mind into a second option while playing, but you must always have option 1 and option 2, or at least option 1 before the ball comes. To do that, this may sound obvious, but you have to keep checking what is around you over your shoulder before receiving the ball. You have to keep checking how close your marker is to you, whether he intends to get tight or whether he is planning to block the return pass you are trying to make. Setting your plan in advance before you have possession is almost the most important ability and skill required of a midfielder. No matter how urgent it is, you should at least know whether he is tight to you or not. This is something from a Busquets interview that I came across during my research. I am not fast, so my head brain has to be fast. I have to be there in advance and predict what is going to happen. It is about scanning, checking where everyone is, and knowing in advance before things happen. I really relate to Busquets' idea that the brain has to be fast. 3. Non-stop open pass. There are 2 know-how points for playing an open pass. The first is non-stop. Basically, this is an open pass hit without even looking, on the assumption that the opponent's defensive line is a little high, and on the assumption that you and our team's winger are on the same page and have good chemistry. For this pass, the winger needs to at least have in mind that I might hit it, or wingers who are good at striking the ball already know. And the reason this pass is almost bound to succeed is that, because the midfielder is playing the ball toward the side, you need to understand that unless there is an overwhelming speed difference between the winger and the opponent's fullback, the structure naturally favors the winger in that speed race. Because of these reasons and strengths, when the defensive line is high, playing the ball out toward the winger on the side can become a very good progression. There is one really important point here. It is that hitting it non-stop is the most powerful. In my opinion, the biggest difference between former players and non-player amateurs may be this technique of turning and bending the ball non-stop. Non-player amateurs tend to first control the ball and then try to do something. But I think this technique of bending and turning the ball in one motion is the ultimate way of releasing the ball along its natural path and keeping the flow of the move alive. But as I keep saying, the player who is going to receive it has to know that the ball is coming out at this timing for the effectiveness to become twice as great. From what I have felt after playing with teams of many different amateur levels, whether a player can predict this pass or not, in both defense and attack, has a considerable effect on the level of play. The second point is that when hitting to the right side, the left foot is advantageous, and when hitting to the left side, the right foot is advantageous. The reason is that the ball naturally bends outward, so it slightly increases the chance that our winger will keep possession of the ball. 4. Reading the opponent's mind. Reading the opponent's mind is exactly a skill that a midfielder must have. Reading the opponent's mind is the skill of reading the opponent's intentions. Football is ultimately a psychological game, so no matter how strong or fast a technique is, if you can predict it, you can stop it. In that sense, reading the opponent's mind is a very powerful skill. Reading the opponent's mind is mainly used against the opponent's build-up from the back, but in fact, it can be used in all situations in football, and if you master it well, you can upgrade your football ability by one level. To understand this skill, we need to analyze through what process we make decisions and play when we pass the ball. If you properly learn just this one skill through this video, you will get full value for the time you spent watching it. First, let's think about when I pass the ball. It is good to identify where to pass before receiving the ball, but sometimes that is impossible. And because the game situation changes, you look for where to pass after receiving the ball. After deciding where to pass, when you actually make the pass, you look at the ball, and then you pass. The key is this: you find where to pass, and then you kick while looking at the ball. In most cases, players pass the ball to the place they looked at last right before kicking it. That split-second moment is the secret. If you have a teammate who is good at reading passes, and he told you a different secret, he lied. This is the secret. However, if you predict too early, in other words, if you move before the opponent's eyes go to the ball, the opponent notices that you are moving to intercept by prediction. So if you move right after the opponent starts looking at the ball, the opponent cannot know that you moved by predicting it. Of course, more advanced players can use this mind-reading skill in reverse as well. Anyway, in amateur football, the probability is very, very high that the opponent will pass in the direction they looked last before making the pass. If you use this skill and intercept a pass, the interception itself is already a benefit, but there is another, more practical benefit. Once a player has had a pass intercepted, he cannot easily play passes into the midfielders during build-up from the back, because he feels pressure that the pass may be intercepted. Then in the end, the opponent's build-up has no choice but to go toward the sides or rely on long balls, and side build-up is easier to trap, while long balls have a high probability of losing possession. So in the end, the fact that you use this mind-reading skill itself is very burdensome for the opponent. Remember this: you need to know where the opponent looks last before passing. And when the opponent looks at the ball, move subtly and quickly, and go win the ball. Also, to use this skill cleverly, you can intentionally leave a good passing lane slightly open and then predict the timing when the opponent is about to pass and move to intercept. On the other hand, if I am the defensive midfielder and I want to deceive the opponent, it can be effective to deliberately look in a different direction from where I actually want to pass, and then pass the other way. Anyway, football is a psychological game. You have to keep thinking about these kinds of predictions constantly. I was also the type of player who won the ball a lot by predicting. So when I felt like the opponent was about to receive the ball, I do not think I stayed too tight to him. From what I remember, I stayed a little off on purpose, because if I stay right up tight, that guy, the passer, does not give the pass to this guy, the receiver, because I am too tight to him. Then if I stay a certain distance away, about 2 to 3 meters away, he is going to play the pass. And then at the exact timing when he plays it, I step in at that timing. 5. Balanced distribution and controlling the attacking tempo. What I felt while preparing this content on defensive midfielders is that there is a lot of overlap between the roles of a central midfielder and a defensive midfielder, and the differences are subtle, so it would be better to cover them together. What I am about to talk about now is closer to the role of a central midfielder. It is about controlling the attacking tempo. A midfielder has to play the role of controlling the tempo of the game according to the match situation. For example, you have to consider various factors, such as whether we are winning by a lot or losing, or whether our winger is tired because he just sprinted. Also, even if you are not fully confident in our wingback, if he is making an overlapping run after sprinting more than 40 meters, you should know how to give him the pass, and you should know how to express appreciation to the wingback who made that overlapping run. That is a virtue a midfielder should have. What everyone who plays football likes in the end is touching the ball a lot during the game. A midfielder should also think about whether there is anyone who has not touched the ball much during the game, and whether the kicks have been distributed evenly to the left and right. Because we are losing right now, when comparing the opponent's fullback and our winger, who has the higher probability of winning, and in which direction should we play the ball so that we can score one more goal more easily, and things like that. A midfielder should play while thinking about all of these things comprehensively. In the end, while seeing the whole game, you have to judge comprehensively the opponent's spacing, their weaknesses, our strengths, and the situation. If the spacing is wide, then into the midfield area where the spacing is wide. if the opponent's line is high, then into the space behind the defensive line, and so on. 6. Make the opponent's ace feel suffocated. Defensive midfielders often have to deal with the opponent's attacking midfielder. That player is usually technically good and highly likely to be the opponent's ace. And defensive midfielders play in areas that are relatively less dangerous than the back four line. And in football teams, the fighters are usually in defensive midfield and at fullback, and usually the psychological battle between both teams happens here. Back when I was at Suwon Samsung, when we played the super match against Seoul, at that time our coach told me to man-mark Molina for the full 90 minutes. I just followed him around, and whenever he got the ball, I hit him really hard. Basically, with foul-level contact, even if it gets called as a foul, hit him hard, but not in a dangerously injuring way, really crash into him. After the contact, I would smile and say, sorry, help him up. And then the next time he got the ball, I would hit him like that again. That is how I remember it. And then the opponent players started getting angry. I kept making fouls, but I was smiling and apologizing, so because of that, I think there was even more contact later on. I remember there was some back and forth mind games too. If you do that, as time goes on, the opponent attacker cannot play his own game as well, because he keeps getting hit. I think he had a lot of difficulty because of that. Against FC Seoul, I remember I did a good job man-marking Molina successfully. And when we played Jeonbuk at that time, there was a player named Luis, and I bothered him a lot, but he did not get shaken for the full 90 minutes. He did not care. Even if I hit him hard, he did not care. He just got right back up and did what he had to do, and I remember thinking, this guy is mentally really strong. I think it is different for every player. 7. Beating pressure. Among the representative skills of a defensive midfielder, you cannot leave out beating pressure, various types of turns, and ball keeping, because defensive midfielders often receive the ball with their back to the opponent's goal. For detailed and more in-depth techniques for beating pressure and turning, if you refer to our channel's Beating the Press video, you will be able to see a lot of techniques. In this video, I will introduce the most representative beating the press and turning techniques that are especially useful for defensive midfielders. The first is the half turn. In my opinion, the half turn is the most important skill in football. As I say in every piece of content, the advantage of the half turn is that the foot you use to control the ball becomes your plant foot, so the timing of the pass is one beat faster and the movement is simple, and the key point is to receive while opening your body halfway or even more. The second is the drag turn. Drag turn is a turn name we arbitrarily gave it on our channel. From what I have observed, when Lee Kang-in receives the ball, I felt that he turns like this in more than 7 out of 10 cases. The advantage of the drag turn is that while turning and moving the ball, it also works as a moving first touch to escape pressure, and at the same time the ball does not get far away from your body. In other words, you turn while deceiving the opponent, but the ball stays under your feet. The third is moving first touch. Moving first touch is a technique where, when the ball is played into you and you expect strong pressure from the defender, you move away from your current spot with one touch. Moving first touch can be done in many ways, with the inside, outside, back foot, and so on, but the key is that it must break the opponent's prediction, and the ball must not get too far away while you move. Lastly, I will add one useful tip I learned during the research for this content. Xavi said in an interview with a Spanish media outlet, "I use the fixed elements of the pitch to understand my position." The elements he mentioned included the lines, the goal, and the referee. The referee stays in a neutral space where he does not interfere with play, but can always see the flow of the ball best. Players like Xavi or Busquets use the referee's position as a reference point and intuitively judge, that is a channel where defenders are not crowded. In a chaotic situation where you are trying to beat pressure, the referee's position can mean that the pressure is likely to be looser there. I think it is a very convincing idea. 8. Winning loose scramble balls. A tudak ball refers to those moments when the ball pops up and becomes nobody's ball after we lose it in attack, or after the opponent loses it in attack, and both sides are scrambling for it. These loose scramble ball situations happen especially often in the midfield area. At that time, it is important to keep possession going by giving it non-stop to a safe teammate, even if it has to be played in the air. It is important to exchange it a few times non-stop, so that our team can keep stable possession and bring it back under control at our feet. If it were deep in the back four area, it might be a ball you would clear, but in the midfield area, in most cases it is better to keep the ball alive and keep possession. 9. Diagonal buildup. Basically, if the ball comes out from the right back, there are many opponent defenders on the right side. If it comes out from the left back, then of course there will be many defenders on the left side. That is natural for any normal football team. Even in amateur football, it is natural, like iron filings being pulled by a magnet toward the ball. So the basic principle of build-up direction is naturally this. If the ball comes out from the right back, it should go to our left winger. And if it comes out from the left back, it should go to our right winger. That would be theoretically ideal. Of course, if the forward is not marked, then you can play it to the forward, or if our winger's movement is not good, or depending on the opponent defender's positions, then naturally it can be different. Anyway, if you play in midfield, the most basic thing you should think about is this diagonal type buildup I just mentioned. Please do not go around using the term diagonal buildup. We just made up that term while preparing this content. When doing this diagonal buildup, the condition for a game-changing killer pass is when the opponent's defensive line is high and the winger on the opposite diagonal has pulled wide enough to receive.
근데 저기 축구에서 이 윙이 안 돼 있더라, 이렇게 준비가 대부분.
10. Heading against goal kicks. When the opponent takes a goal kick, it usually has to be dealt with by the defensive midfielder. If there is a defensive midfielder who keeps winning headers after contesting 2 or 3 aerial duels, that itself becomes a powerful weapon for our team, especially if one header can clear the ball far beyond the opponent's defensive line, or if a precise header can keep possession for our team, it becomes really powerful. Even then, if the opponent team keeps hitting goal kicks or long kicks from the defensive area, then the opponent team is being foolish. Being good at heading involves many factors such as reading the dropping point, timing, height, jumping ability, courage, and so on. But in the end, you usually know after competing 2 times or so. From the opponent's point of view, they lose one option, so it becomes frustrating. But one thing I feel is that, because the mindset toward football matches is different between your player days and amateur football. In amateur football, people do not seem to attack goal kick balls with direct headers as if they are going to crack their heads open. Anyway, it is definitely true that a defensive midfielder being good at headers in our defensive area is a big merit. To give a brief tip on heading, reading the dropping point is the most important thing. And at the very least, if you are a defensive midfielder, it is good to have enough fighting spirit and heading ability to at least disrupt the opponent's header. Additionally, we also have a video on our channel about how to head well, so please check that out. Outro. Today we took a detailed look at how to play well as a defensive midfielder. How was it? Now, at least in your head, you fully understand how you should think and how you should move in defensive midfield, right? As I always say, understanding it in your head and actually executing it are completely different things. Practice is the only way. If you need practice, the method is in the pinned comment link below. Please check it out. I will continue to do my best to become a channel that explains football in overwhelmingly detailed ways. Usually in amateur football, the wingers are often not ready. Once you get to around the level of more advanced high school players, when a center back takes a goal kick, they switch positions with the defensive midfielder. Basically, when it looks like a goal kick is coming, they set it up in advance. And if we are pressing and need to win the header, usually center backs are good at heading, right? So the center back steps up a little and wins the header, and I, the defensive midfielder, drop off a little behind him. So if the defensive midfielder is tall and is the type who can be a target, that is a big advantage. Rather than saying one is better or worse, I think it depends on the quality of the player making the pass. There are players who can hit it well with the right foot, and that may be more comfortable for them. On the other hand, if you want to hit it to the right side, and you bend it with the left foot using the instep so it curls outward, then the ball is not going to go out, right? If you play it into space, you know what I mean, right? Right. If you hit it like that with the left foot, depending on how you hit it, it could go out, or the winger out wide here could control it. But if you bend and hit it like this with the left foot, it is not going to go out on the outside, right? If you play it into space, I think there are pros and cons like that, and I do not think there is a clear absolute right or wrong. Even if I am more comfortable with my right foot, if the situation itself is such that the defender is positioned on this side, there can be situations where I turn my body like this and hit it with my left foot.